In a quiet suburban neighborhood, an innocent friendship spiraled into something dark and destructive. What began as a secret affair had consequences that no one could have predicted. This is the story of Emma, a devout Christian wife, and her Muslim neighbor Ahmed, whose relationship would eventually lead to a crime that shocked the entire community. The year was 2009. Emma's life seemed perfect. A dedicated Christian woman living in a modest yet tidy home in a peaceful part of Atlanta, Georgia. She was married to Mark, a well-respected man in their church community, known for his unwavering faith and involvement in church activities. At 38, Mark was a steady presence, often leading prayers and contributing in every Sunday service. Disciplined and punctual, he carried himself with quiet authority. Despite appearances, their marriage had its struggles. To those around them, Emma and Mark appeared to be the model Christian couple, but within their home, Emma felt an overwhelming loneliness. At 35, she was a dedicated homemaker, raising their 2 children, Sarah and David, who were 12 and 8. She was also deeply involved in church activities like Sunday school, charity events, and women's fellowship. Yet, none of these activities filled the emptiness she felt inside. Over the years, Mark had become emotionally distant, focusing more on his faith and the image they projected than on nurturing their relationship. Emma longed for affection and connection, someone who could see her beyond her roles as a wife and mother. In the quiet moments at home, she would often sit by the window, wondering if life would always feel this hollow, a series of duties without warmth or true companionship. During this time, she noticed Ahmed, her new neighbor. He had moved in next door with his wife Aisha and their newborn son in the spring of 2009. At 32, Ahmed was a civil engineer with a busy work schedule, but he always made time for his family. Unlike Mark, Ahmed exuded a gentle and caring presence. His wife, Aisha, rarely left the house, as she was struggling with postpartum depression. At first, Emma and Ahmed's interactions were simple and friendly. They chatted over the fence, discussing neighborhood issues and their children's school. Ahmed's kindness and quiet empathy became a stark contrast to the indifference Emma felt from Mark. Over the following months, the 2 families grew closer, attending neighborhood events and barbecues. Ahmed's warmth drew Emma in, stirring emotions she had never anticipated. Emma had never considered stepping outside her marriage, but she couldn't ignore the feelings that began to grow. Emma tried to suppress her feelings, constantly reminding herself of her marriage vows and the faith she was committed to honoring. But each time she spoke with Ahmed, the undeniable connection between them pulled at her. Ahmed, too, was struggling within his marriage. Aisha's battle with depression had created a gap between them, leaving Ahmed feeling isolated and emotionally drained. In many ways, he felt the same loneliness that Emma was experiencing in her own home. As time drifted into 2010, Emma and Ahmed's encounters became more frequent. She found herself looking for opportunities to cross paths with him, whether during morning routines or while retrieving the mail. Their conversations, still innocent on the surface, started delving deeper. They shared their lives, their struggles, and the loneliness that haunted them. Ahmed admired Emma's resilience and her ability to manage her household, while Emma admired his gentle, thoughtful nature. Unlike Mark, Ahmed truly listened to her. Emma found herself lying awake at night, reflecting on these talks, feeling both guilty and exhilarated. She knew these feelings were wrong, yet being understood and seen by Ahmed felt like a rare light in the bleakness of her life. Ahmed, too, was torn. Raised in a conservative Muslim family where marriage was considered sacred and extramarital relationships were strictly forbidden, he wrestled with his emotions. However, the bond with Emma felt unique. It went beyond mere attraction. They understood each other's suffering. Often he would think of her during work, wondering how she was coping with the lack of warmth in her marriage. He justified his feelings by telling himself that he was simply offering her the emotional support she needed. But deep down, he knew this was dangerous territory. By mid-2010, their relationship had shifted from emotional support to something much more. One evening, under the pretense of borrowing a gardening tool, Ahmed invited Emma over. Aisha was visiting her family, and Emma's children were fast asleep. They sat together in Ahmed's living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Neither had intended for what happened next, but in that moment, they could no longer resist their desire. That night altered everything. From then on, they would meet in secret whenever possible, hiding their affair from both spouses and the neighborhood. Emma would slip over to Ahmed's house when Aisha was away, and they would spend hours together. The guilt weighed on them, but the forbidden nature of their relationship only fueled the passion. As a devoted Christian, Emma prayed for forgiveness nightly, only to find herself in Ahmed's arms again the next day. She knew that her actions clashed with her beliefs, but she couldn't resist the excitement, the thrill, the feeling of being truly desired. It was intoxicating. Ahmed, on the other hand, began rationalizing his actions. He told himself that his marriage with Aisha was already crumbling and that he was giving Emma the love and affection she so desperately needed. But as the affair deepened, the toll on him grew. He became increasingly distant at home, avoiding conversations with Aisha, who had started noticing his changed behavior. His once calm and composed demeanor was breaking under the weight of their secret. By late 2010, both Emma and Ahmed knew they were on a path leading to ruin. They had crossed a boundary from which there was no easy return. Emma and Ahmed were caught in a web of passion and deceit that had reached a point of no return. They knew the consequences if their spouses ever discovered the truth would be devastating, yet they couldn't stop. Emma, torn between guilt and her longing for Ahmed, was leading a double life, playing the role of devoted wife and mother by day, while meeting Ahmed in secret by night. Ahmed, equally consumed by his desire for Emma, found himself unable to break free. Their affair had become an addiction, one that they both knew would lead to their downfall. On the morning of March 6, 2012, police received an anonymous tip about a suspicious death at Emma's house. Local officers arrived to find Mark lying lifeless in a pool of blood, with Emma in a state of shock. Ahmed, nowhere to be found, had fled the scene immediately after the incident. By late 2011, the strain of their affair was showing in both Emma and Ahmed's lives. What once felt like an escape from their struggles had turned into a heavy burden. Emma, once attentive and involved at home, had started to withdraw from her daily routines. Cooking dinner became a chore, and she spent less and less time with her children. Her smiles, once warm and genuine, now appeared forced, hiding something darker. Mark, ever the attentive and disciplined husband, began noticing these changes. Initially, he thought she was just tired or overwhelmed by church activities. But as time passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Emma was coming home later than usual, claiming to be at church or running errands, and she seemed distant when he asked about her day. Although suspicious, Mark chose not to confront her immediately, turning instead to his faith, hoping that prayer and counsel from the church would provide answers. Meanwhile, Ahmed's household was also unraveling. Aisha, sensitive to Ahmed's moods, noticed he was increasingly distracted and distant, often leaving at odd hours under the pretense of work or errands. Battling postpartum depression, she felt more alone than ever. Attempts to talk to Ahmed about their marriage only led to arguments, with him often shifting blame back to her, accusing her of not being present enough. The calm and warmth that had once defined their home had faded. By early 2012, the weight of keeping their secret was becoming too much for both Emma and Ahmed. Emma's guilt grew overwhelming, especially on Sundays, when sermons about faithfulness and sin struck close to home. She feared eternal punishment and felt like she was living on the edge. Every time she looked at her children, she was reminded of the lies she was hiding from them, and every time she saw Mark, she feared he would see through her facade. Ahmed, too, felt the weight of his actions. His faith was important to him, and he knew he was betraying his beliefs and values. Ending the affair crossed his mind often, but the thought of Emma's absence felt unbearable. By February 2012, tensions had reached their peak. Aisha, tired of Ahmed's evasiveness, confronted him directly about his behavior. She had noticed his growing distance and sensed his dishonesty, despite his attempts to blame work and stress. At the same time, Mark's suspicions about Emma deepened. He watched her closely, noticing how distracted she seemed, even in simple conversations. Emma had become so consumed by the affair that her once careful facade was slipping. On the night of March 3, 2012, a powerful storm hit Atlanta, bringing heavy rain and high winds. But the real storm was brewing inside Emma's home. Mark had gone on a church retreat for the weekend, leaving Emma to believe she had meticulously planned her night with Ahmed, arranging for her children to stay at her mother's and ensuring no neighbors would suspect a thing. But fate intervened. For reasons Emma couldn't understand, Mark returned early from his church retreat. Perhaps his suspicions had intensified, or maybe something on his trip had unsettled him. Entering the house unannounced, Mark was confronted with a sight he could never have imagined: his wife in the arms of another man. The life he knew was shattered in an instant. Chaos ensued. In a rage, Mark grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife on the counter, and lunged at Ahmed. The struggle that followed was fierce, charged with betrayal and desperation. Emma, frozen in shock, watched as the two men fought. In a heated moment, Ahmed wrested the knife from Mark, but the momentum drove it into Mark's chest, twice. Silence fell, interrupted only by Emma's horrified scream. As blood pooled on the floor, Ahmed stood breathless, the knife still in his hand, realizing there was no going back. Outside, the storm raged, but the damage inside was far worse. 2 days later, on March 6th, the police responded to an anonymous tip about suspicious activity at Emma's house. Arriving to a gruesome scene, they found Mark's body lying in a pool of blood. Emma, in shock, struggled to respond to officers' questions. Ahmed had already fled, leaving Emma alone to face the consequences. Within days, detectives brought Emma in for questioning. Initially, she tried to shield Ahmed by claiming a break-in gone wrong, but detectives were skeptical, noting neighbor statements about Ahmed's frequent visits. Forensic evidence, including fingerprints on the knife and traces of Ahmed's clothing, further undermined her story. By March 8th, police shifted their focus to finding Ahmed. Ahmed, hiding in a motel several towns away, grappled with the weight of his actions. On March 20th, police found and arrested him. He claimed self-defense, insisting that Mark had attacked him first. But the prosecution painted a different story, depicting him as a man whose emotions had clouded his judgment, leading him to take desperate measures to cover up an affair that had spiraled out of control. The trial became a spectacle in Atlanta, drawing attention from Emma and Mark's church community. The once celebrated couple had become the focus of scandal and whispers. As the trial began on May 15, 2013, the courtroom was filled with tension. Emma, known for her quiet devotion, now faced accusations that shattered the values she once upheld. Her emotional state was fragile, her hands trembling, and her complexion pale. Ahmed, too, had changed, his once composed demeanor now dulled by months of guilt and sleepless nights. The prosecution wasted no time recounting the events of March 3rd, presenting a story of two lovers driven by passion and desperation, leading to violence. Under intense questioning, Emma eventually confessed to the affair. Her attempts to shield Ahmed had fallen apart, and as each day passed, her guilt became more evident. Her confession shocked those who once admired her for her faith and commitment. Ahmed's defense, meanwhile, held little ground. He maintained that Mark's death was an accident, an act of self-defense. But the prosecution countered with evidence, suggesting Ahmed had gone to great lengths to hide the affair, even if it meant taking a life. By July, the outcome seemed inevitable. On July 20th, Ahmed was sentenced to 25 years in prison for manslaughter. The verdict felt insufficient to some, as many believed his betrayal and the murder warranted a harsher sentence. Emma received a reduced sentence of 15 years for her cooperation, though it still meant years of separation from her children. The trial's aftermath left a deep scar on the Atlanta community. The local church, once a source of unity, struggled to reconcile the tragedy. Emma's children, Sarah and David, were sent to live with relatives. 14-year-old Sarah, grappling with betrayal and loss, couldn't understand how her once idolized mother could be involved in such a tragedy. David, at 10, was too young to grasp the full extent, but he knew his family had been irreversibly broken. Aisha, devastated by both Ahmed's betrayal and the murder, soon moved away with their child, leaving behind the life they had once shared. Ahmed, now in prison, reflected on the choices that had led him there, knowing he had destroyed his own family. His child would grow up without him, and Aisha could never forgive him for the pain he had caused. The neighborhood, once peaceful, was left to cope with the tragic events that had unfolded in their midst. The scandal left an indelible mark, a reminder of how secrets and unchecked desires can lead to devastating consequences. Emma and Ahmed's choices didn't just destroy their lives, they shattered a community that had once placed its faith in family and moral values. This tragic story poses tough questions. What drives people to make choices that lead to ruin? How do love, guilt, and desperation culminate in irreversible actions? If you're intrigued by stories of tragic affairs and shocking crimes, don't forget to like and subscribe for more compelling crime stories.